What's up, Gens? Welcome back. Happy Friday. Welcome back to another edition of the Quick Bricks NBA DFS podcast, brought to you by the good guys over at Fantasy Degens. As always, Sean Mitchell here at SMitchell17. Of course, hope you guys are enjoying your Friday. Get a nice little kickstart to the weekend. Got a nice little 8-game slate here in the NBA. Lots of news to watch today. Tons of guys that have been traded. Lots of questionables and game time decisions as far as other players goes. We literally have like no totals at the point right now, so it'd be really interesting. It's going to be an interesting slate, but nonetheless, the show must go on, right? So let's go ahead and kick this off, get right into it. We'll talk about the games a little bit. Again, not really any spreads or totals, so we're going to talk a little bit about the pace more so. Game number one, we have the Grizzlies going against the 76ers in Philadelphia. Don't have a spread, don't have a total. However, the 76ers did just get beat last night against Milwaukee, so they're taking their loss back home to face the Grizzlies tonight. Memphis, the sixth fastest team over their last 10. Philadelphia is the 17th, so obviously this is going to be a decently paced game for Philadelphia, a little pace-up spot for them. We know Memphis likes to run, so they're obviously going to have to play up to their speed a little bit, so it's a pretty interesting game. The Mavericks going into Washington. Obviously, this is going to be a game that we're going to want to target. Of course, no total, no spread. Dallas 22nd in terms of pace over their last 10. Washington is 5th. So, yeah, this is going to be a massive pace-up spot here for Dallas. There could be without Kristaps Porzingis. So that game is very interesting. Could be lots of value in that game. We'll talk more about that once we get into the positionals. Game number 3, Hawks at the Celtics. Boston minus 9.5 here at home. Basically a rematch of this game 2 games ago. Atlanta, the third fastest team over their last 10. Boston is 13th. If Atlanta can find a way to hang around, they're still not going to have Clint Capella. He's still injured. Nonetheless, Trae Young has been a beast. John Collins has been really good. But, of course, they just haven't been good enough to be able to keep him in games. Boston got ahead of them pretty quick after the second half in this last game. And this one is in Boston as well. That one was in Atlanta. So, with that being said, it's a pretty big spread. It's a good spot. Two pretty quick teams so far over their last 10 games. Game number 4, Raptors going into Indiana. Another rematch that we literally just saw. Toronto is the 12th fastest team over their last 10. Indiana 26th. Pistons at the Thunder. OKC minus 12.5 here at home. Excuse me. Detroit 25th fastest team over their last 10. OKC 19th. Pretty slow game. Drummond traded. Obviously some news in that one. Some value as well. Rockets at the Suns. Houston minus 2.5 here on the road. Don't have a total. Houston is on a back-to-back after playing in LA last night, going into the desert tonight to play Phoenix. Houston, 4th fastest over their last 10. Phoenix, 15th. So, yeah, definitely consider seeing this game in the 235-ish, 238 range. Just two really fast teams. Don't play a whole lot of defense, so this is going to be the game that everybody's going to want to stack up. Also, no Russell Westbrook, so it's hard not. Who also had a dud last night, so look for the bounce back. Heat going into Sacramento to play the Kings. Miami 27th over their last 10 in terms of pace. Sacramento 23rd. Two pretty slow teams. The Heat could be without Jimmy Butler. The Kings could likely get back Rashawn Holmes tonight. That's something that they really need. Pretty dire. And then your late night cap. Again, no total, no spreads on these games. There's literally nothing. The Blazers at the Jazz. Portland off a back-to-back last night, played at home against San Antonio, going into Utah tonight. Not a great spot for them traveling on a back-to-back. Portland, 14th fastest team over their last 10, Utah 20th. So that's kind of a breakdown of the games, at least for the information that we have at the moment. Let's go ahead and hop into the positionals. Kick it off at the point guard. Feels like every quick bricks I've done lately has been Trae Young, and we're not mad about it. The guy has continually been really good. 50 fantasy points last game against Boston. Smart is probable, so that could put a damper on him just a little. But Kimba is still a game-time decision with that knee injury. We don't know if he'll be limited. Nonetheless, they more so are probably going to likely put Smart on Trae Young. So keep that in mind. Nonetheless, over 50 fantasy points in his last 4 of 6. Right under a shade of 35% usage rate over his last 5 at 34.9. Moving on, Ben Simmons at 8K. Gets a nice, again, a pace-up spot here with a Memphis at home. He's gone for 46 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 on his home floor. 34 or more minutes in his last 4 or 5 as well. Has been playing tons of minutes, heavy minutes. They're going to need him. Philadelphia needs to turn things around. Took again another loss last night. They're not playing really well. They're about like the 5th or 7th seed in the East right now. Yeah, they're going to have to do some soul searching. De'Aaron Fox at 7-8, I think, is a spot that nobody will likely go to, but it's a really good one, obviously, as well, if Jimmy Butler sits. You know, the Miami's dealing with some injuries. They're traded away a few players. They're not going to have just a whole bunch of bodies on the floor, but nonetheless, De'Aaron Fox has been really good at home. He's been really good lately. 31 or more in his last 3 at home, 32 versus Miami last game when they played in Miami, and he's carrying a shade under 31% usage at 30.7% over his last 5. So the usage is there. He's playing well. He's under 8K. He's at home. Really like De'Aaron Fox in this spot. Kimba, if he does happen to play, we're going to have to make sure that he has no limitations. It was a knee injury. It wasn't a thumb or an elbow or something. It's something that was pretty significant. So we want to make sure that he's full go. If he is, obviously it's going to be an absolutely great spot against Atlanta here. So we'll keep that one in mind. Kyle Lowry absolutely went off against Indiana in this game last game. 62.5 fantasy points versus them. And then tonight, gets him again. Could be without Victor Oladipo. He could be sitting for tonight. Over 40 fantasy points in his last 3 or 4 on the road. 22.5% usage rate over those last 5 games on the road. Like I said, just put up 60 points. Nobody was on him. He was such a contrarian play, and nobody was on him. Nonetheless, really cheap again tonight. Going down, Chris Paul at 7.1. 34 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 5 at home. 34 or more fantasy points in his last 4 or 5 overall. 30 or more minutes in his last 3 or 4 as well. 24.3% usage. Chris Paul's been playing well. We saw him put up 52 games ago. So, can't ever really count him out. It's a good spot against Detroit here at home, who is without Derrick Rose. They're starting Reggie Jackson, Bruce Brown. So nonetheless, it's a good spot for CP3. And then on his backup, Dennis Schroeder, who's been playing absolutely magnificent lately. Last 4 over 42 fantasy points, 28.2% usage rate, leads the team once again, over 30 minutes a game, and over 20 real actual points in his last 8 straight. So Dennis Schroeder been playing really well. He continues to be a really nice option. Only 6.8K. So still get him under 7K. It's pretty criminal, but nonetheless, you got to play some Schroeder again tonight against Detroit. Reggie Jackson here on the flip side at 6.1. Just beasted out last game for 48.3 fantasy points. Again, no Derrick Rose. This is a small revenge spot. If you remember, Reggie Jackson came from OKC, so he's going back into OKC tonight. A little bit of a revenge. OKC is allowing 8th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 10 as well. He's gone for 31 or more fantasy points in his last 5 of 7 since returning. So Reggie Jackson obviously will be in play. A play that I really like tonight is Jalen Brunson at 5.6. Detroit could possibly be without Seth Curry, JJ Barea, Kristaps Porzingis. They're already without Luka Doncic, Dwight Powell. Nonetheless, he's played 27, 31, and 33 minutes over his last 3 games. He's only 5.6K tonight on DraftKings. 25.9% usage rate over those last 3. Just a shade under Kristaps Porzingis for second highest usage on the team over those 3 games. 32 and 45 fantasy points in his last 2 of 3. So we see the upside. We know Brunson played really well whenever Doncic was out last time. Also, Washington is allowing the 6th most of that point guard spot over the last 10. So it's a great spot here for Brunson. Hopefully he gets over 30 minutes. He will likely be a little chalky, especially if Kristaps is out, but he's going to be good chalk. There's no way you can not play him at that price, especially in such a fast-paced game against Washington. So keep that one in mind. He's definitely in play. Ricky Rubio at 5.6. Interestingly enough, played 35 minutes last game. Had a bad game the game before, was out for a few games before that, came back, played 20-ish minutes, didn't do much, and then, again, last game, comes out, plays 35 minutes. Only shoots the ball 4 times, only had 4 points. But he had 11 assists, he had 1 rebound and 4 steals. Tonight is back at home, where he gets a really nice matchup against Houston. So keep Ricky Rubio in mind. I highly doubt that he's going to take, less than 3 shots this time. I'm sure the assist numbers will still be there. The steals should still be there. I figure he'll probably grab a couple more rebounds than one. So Ricky Rubio at 5.6, I think presents some decent value tonight. I know it kind of feels like we're beating a dead horse with him as we keep going back to him, but I'm telling you, he's gonna pop off for one, and it could easily be tonight. Goran Dragic at 5.3. Obviously, if Butler sits, they will have to rely on him a lot more on the second unit. Carrying a 22.9% usage rate over his last 5. He's put up 35 and 41 fantasy points in his last 2 of 3. 30 or more minutes in his last 3 or 4 games. So Dragic has been playing well. Gets a good spot here against Sacramento on the road. Bruce Brown at 4.9, as I mentioned earlier. He's starting at the shooting guard. He's playing lots and lots of minutes. He's only 4.9 tonight against OKC. 33, 38 minutes over his last 3. 47, 28, and 25 fantasy points over those 3 as well. And now they don't have Drummond. So you have to think about all the usage that's about to be extended out and absorbed between the other players. So you're going to get a lot to Wood. You're going to get a lot to Reggie Jackson. You're going to get a lot to Bruce Brown. There's still Dumboya has been starting at the power forward spot. Don't really have to worry about him too much, but he's dirt cheap. Nonetheless, Bruce Brown is back in play for sure at under 5K. Kendrick Nunn, other than on the flip, not on the flip side, but they're along with Goran Dragic. Kendrick Nunn is 4.8K. Of course, if those guys sit, Butler included, good minutes for him, good production, and obviously should see a nice usage bump. 35 minutes last game, put up 31 fantasy points. 3 or 4 games ago against this same Sacramento team, he put up 41.3. So 20 shade under 21% at 20.2% usage rate over his last 5. Kendrick Nunn obviously will be in play once again. A little bit going down a little bit further, a little cheaper. Ish Smith at 4.7. Could be likely the only true point guard on this team, with Shabazz Napier being traded over. Isaiah Thomas is gone, and he could see 28 plus, 30 plus minutes here easily. Again, in a good spot against Dallas, who's allowing the number 1 most fantasy points to the point guard spot over the last 10. Ish Smith is in prime time spot here. 21 or more fantasy points in his last 5 of 6, 23 or more in his last 4 of 5. So Ish will absolutely be in play at his price. Of course, especially if Shabazz does not happen to make his debut. I don't see how you cannot play Ish Smith. Going down a little bit further, Jordan Clarkson at 4.5 gets a really good spot here against Portland on who is on a back-to-back. I can see Portland, starting off a little sluggish. They played San Antonio last night, ran it to the wire. This is a good spot for Utah. I could see Clarkson getting a little extra run. Portland is allowing the 4th most of that point guard spot over their last 10. He's played 23 or more minutes in his last 4 straight. He's put up 22 or more fantasy points in his last 3 of 4. In those 3 of 4, he's put up 22, 47, and 28. So good numbers from Clarkson. He's still cheap, getting good run off the bench. Austin Rivers at 4K is about as cheap as I want to go, I think, in the point guard list. No Russell Westbrook, as I mentioned. 24 or more minutes in his last 6 of 7. He's put up 24 or more fantasy points in his last 4 or 5 on the road as well. They did get Robert Covington. He did play 30 minutes last night. Rivers played good minutes. It was actually Ben McLemore that saw a decrease. He only saw about 20 minutes last night, so that's really interesting. Obviously, Russell Westbrook did play, so keep that in mind. But Rivers has been the guy off the bench. He's the first guard that they bring in. He's going to continue to see good minutes, and especially will again tonight without Russell Westbrook. So, moving over to the shooting guard spot, good segue right into Harden. 12-1, he's expensive, but he had a 38.3 fantasy point game last night, so you better believe he's probably going to go for 80 against Phoenix tonight. It's a good spot. It's a bounce back. And, of course, he's seeing close to 50% usage without Russell Westbrook and Clint Capella, who was traded. So, Harden, yeah. Brad Beal, yes. 10.1. If you want to do a little savings and get just as good of a play, Bill does have 60-plus upside. Dallas, again, has not really been good. They've been giving up a lot of points to guards. 37.4% usage rate over Bill's last 5 games. 50 or more fantasy points in his last 7 straight. Over 60 in his last 2 of 4. So, again, Bill has been uber consistent over his last 5 to 7 games. He's been over 50 fantasy points in all 7. And over 60 that we've seen the flash. So, Bill is in a great spot again here at home. Devin Booker at 7.9 against Houston. 37 or more in his last 5 of 7, 28.2% usage rate over his last 5, over 20 real actual points in his last 6 of 7 as well. Devin Booker is absolutely a great play under 8K in a really fast-paced game here at home, need I mention. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 7.2. Really loved him the other night against Cleveland. Cleveland's terrible against shooting guards. He absolutely demolished them, put up 49.8 fantasy points. Love SGA once again tonight. 32 or more minutes per game. Detroit D, and he's put up over 39 fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. So, SGA obviously in play once again. Fred VanVleet at 6.5. 32 or more minutes over his last 4. He's put up over 31 fantasy points in his last 10 of 11 games. 7 or more assists in his last 5 of 6. A total of 12 steals over his last 6 games. Fred VanVleet's been playing well. Had 4 steals against this same Indiana team last game. So keep that in mind. Fred VanVleet's pretty cheap. Also, they are without Norman Powell for an indefinite amount of time, so Fred VanVleet is going to continue to see heavy minutes. Marcus Smart at 5.8 has been deemed probable, so it looks like he will be a go. Gets a great spot here against Atlanta. Should start at the point guard spot if Kemba happens to not be able to play. 30 or more fantasy points over his last 3 straight. 34 plus minutes in his last 3 or 4, carrying a shade under 23 at 22.7% usage rate over his last 3 as well. So good stuff from Marcus Smart. He's been playing well. He's been actually a little bit more aggressive, taking more shots, and it couldn't be a better spot against Atlanta here at home. Buddy Hield at 5.7 I think is a dark horse nobody even looks at. He's put up 25, 36, and 34 fantasy points over his last 3. No, I'm sorry, that's minutes. 25, 36, and 34 minutes over his last 3. Apologies. 33 or more fantasy points over his last 4 of 6, though, however. Miami is allowing the ninth most of that shooting guard spot. Could be without Jimmy Butler. This is a very interesting spot for Buddy, who continues to play well off the bench. He's seeing good minutes, and he doesn't really need a whole lot of time to get up a lot of shots. So Buddy Hield at 5.7 I think is intriguing as a tournament play. Tim Hardaway Jr. at 5.2. If Kristaps happens to sit, he should see a nice little usage bump. He's put up 25 or more fantasy points over his last 3 or 4. 21.4% usage rate over his last 5. Obviously, that will probably be more like 24%, 25% if KP happens to sit. So keep that in mind. THJ will likely be a little chalky if Kristaps sits, but it's a good spot against Washington. You can't not like it. Dylan Brooks at 5.2 just got paid, got a 3-year extension, like $36 million. Good for him. Happy for Dylan Brooks. He's been playing pretty well. 27 or more fantasy points in his last 7 of 8. 25.3% usage rate over his last 5. 14 or more field goal attempts over his last 7 straight. So he's taking a lot of shots. He's been really consistent. He's been very active, and he's only 5.2 tonight. Good spot in Philadelphia. Eric Gordon at 5.2 obviously should continue to get the start. He's played over 30 minutes in his last 8 straight. No Russell Westbrook. Phoenix is allowing the 4th most of that shooting guard spot over their last 10. And he's put up 21 or more fantasy points over his last 4 straight. So Eric Gordon, if you want to go there, totally fine with it. More on DraftKings than FanDuel. Bogdan Bogdanovic at 5K. I know we talked about Buddy, who's actually $700 more. Bogdan has actually put up 29 or more fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. 27 or more minutes over his last 4 or 5. Again, Miami allowing the 9th most of that shooting guard spot over the last 10. So Bogdan is obviously interesting as well. He's been just as consistent since he's been getting the minutes in the starting rotation. So
Bogdan,
hey, I'm fine with that as well. Langston Galloway at 3.9, 25 and 26.3 fantasy points over his last 2. Has played 30 and 34 minutes. 30 and 34 minutes over his last 2. Obviously no Drummond. Obviously no Rose. No Luke Kennard. Galloway will continue to see big, heavy minutes at 3.9. Terrence Davis at 3.7. If you want to go for a nice little tournament play, he's put up 20 and 39.5 fantasy points over his last 2. Got a lot of extended run in that blowout 2 games ago where he absolutely went off. But nonetheless, he's played 27 and 28 minutes over his last 2 with Powell being out. 21.5% usage rate over those 2 as well. So Terrence Davis, as James Grande likes to refer to him as lightning in a bottle, he is exactly that. He will come on. He will do a lot in a short amount of time. So he's getting good run. His usage rate is good. At 3.7, we've seen the 40-point upside. So if you want to go there, I'm totally fine in tournaments. Going over to the small forward spot, Gordon Hayward, over 43 fantasy points in his last 4 of 5, 33 or more minutes over his last 7. Of course, Atlanta is terrible on defense. They're allowing the 9th most of that small forward spot over their last 10. Kelly Oubre at 6.7 continues to play really well. 23.7% usage rate over his last 5 games, 36 or more minutes over his last 4 straight, over 35 fantasy points in his last 5 of 7. Gets a good spot here against Houston at home. Tobias Harris, fresh off a 44-pointer last night against Milwaukee. Played 38 minutes against Memphis defense tonight, who traded off Jay Crowder. Likely will be starting Kyle Anderson at the 3. Like the spot here for Tobias Harris at 6.2K at home against Memphis. Dorian Finney-Smith, of course, will get a bump if KP is out as well, along with all the others. 6K tonight. Put up a dud last game, only put up 19.3, but the 3 games before that, 29, 45, and 39. So yeah, DFS will definitely be in play once again. Good spot against Washington. On the flip side, Davis Bertans at 5.4. 32 minutes last game, put up 38 fantasy points. We're getting the old Bertans back here. Over 30 minutes in his last 4 or 5 is very encouraging, and he's went for 26 or more fantasy points as well in his last 6 or 7 since returning as well. So Bertans is getting back to his usual minutes. They did bring back Rui Hashimura. They also got back Moritz Wagner. But however, they did trade Isaiah Thomas. They literally have but like a couple of guards to play tonight. So nonetheless, Bertans will continue to see good minutes. Mikal Bridges at 4.9 for Phoenix has been playing loads of minutes as well. They still have injuries to Cam Johnson. There's still Dario Saric. So Bridges will continue to see good minutes, 31 or more over his last 5 games. 29 or more fantasy points in his last 3 of 5. He's gotten at least 6 or more rebounds in his last 3 of 4. 4+ assists over his last 2. 6 total steals and 5 total blocks over his last 3. So good defensive numbers. Bridges has been playing well. Gets a turnover-prone Houston team tonight. So definitely like him at the 4.9K price tag. Duncan Robinson at 4.3 can be a filler spot if Butler happens to sit. For the Heat, 33 or more minutes over his last 5 of 6. 21 or more fantasy points over his last 5 of 6 as well. We've seen the upside. We've seen him go for 30 plus a couple of times. So again, if you want to slot him in, I'm totally fine, especially if Butler sits. Going over to the power forward spot, Domantas Sabonis at 9K. Just put up 47 versus the same Toronto team last game. Over 38 in his last 6 of 7. Over 47 over his last 2. So Sabonis continues to be an elite play. He's uber consistent, cash game lock. John Collins is a nice play for tournaments at 8.4. Has kind of been blowout proof lately. 33 or more minutes over his last 5. Just put up 48 against Boston 2 games ago. Over 41 fantasy points over his last 5 straight. 21.9% usage rate. Does a little bit of everything. Has scored over 20 real points in his last 5 of 6. Grabbed over 10 or 11 rebounds. So yeah, Collins will continue to be a good play. On the flip side, Jason Tatum at 8.1 has gone for 40 or more fantasy points in his last 6 of 7. Atlanta allowing the 8th most of that power forward spot over their last 10. Just put up 45 last game against Sacramento, and he has played 35 and 39 minutes over his last 2. So, they've been injury riddled. Tice is still out. Cantor's only playing 25 or less minutes. Kemba could be out again. Jaylen Brown is questionable. Gordon Hayward is questionable. Lots of news to watch for the Celtics, but Jason Tatum is going to be the rock there either way. Danilo Gallinari at 6.1, 32 or more fantasy points over his last 2 of 3 at home. Detroit, of course, without a few people, obviously without Drummond, kind of hurts them a little bit down low. Over 30 minutes in his last 9 of 11 games. Danilo Gallinari continues to be a cash game play. Bojan Bogdanovic for Utah gets a good little spot here at 5.9. Over 30 fantasy points over his last 5-7. He's played 30 or more minutes in his last 5 of 6. Going to get mellow defense here. So yeah, totally fine with Bojan at 5.9 at home. Robert Covington, again, 5.7 tonight. Gets a little bit of a price reduction after he made his debut for the Rockets last night. Played 30 minutes. Put up 39 fantasy points. 14 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, 1 block. 2 blocks. Sorry. So, yeah, Robert Covington gelled in pretty well, it seems like. Played 30 minutes off the bench. Didn't even start. And he played really well. So, Robert Covington should play 30-plus minutes again. They need him. They don't have anybody else down low. P.J. Tucker starting at the 5. Rocco is in play again, once again here. On the back-to-back, good spot against Phoenix, who's allowing the 6th most of that power forward spot over their last 10. Good spot. Carmelo Anthony, fresh off a 38-pointer last night against San Antonio, played 35 minutes, 28 or more fantasy points in his last 5 of 7 games, over 32 minutes in his last 11 of 12. So, if you want to be a contrarian, you can. It's not the greatest of spots. Utah is one of the hardest places to play on a back-to-back, especially in Utah. So, but he's cheap. He's 5K. He's 5.1, and he just put up 38. So you see the upside. His price has upside in it. If you want to go there, I'm totally fine. It's very contrarian. Going a little bit cheaper, Rui Hachimura at 4.5. Played 26 minutes in his return, 20 fantasy points only. But he only put up 11 points and 8 rebounds, no other peripherals. You really want more, and he was doing a lot more. If he gets some, I mean, even at 26 minutes, if he does just a little bit more than he did, he should easily put up 30 fantasy points. He's only 4.5. So, good spot. Gets a good spot here against Dallas, especially if KP is out. And then on the flip side, you get Maxi Kleber at 4.4 if KP is out as well. Nonetheless, he's been seeing really good minutes off the bench. Just put up 39 against Atlanta 2 games ago. 18 or more fantasy points in his last 4 straight. Over 30 minutes over his last 3. So Kleber has been playing good minutes, getting good run. Grant Williams for Boston. 3.8. He's kind of the backup center at the moment while Tice is out. 22 and 25 minutes over his last 2 games, splitting with Cantor. And he's put up 28.5 and 29 fantasy points over those last 2. So Grant Williams is a nice little salary saver if you want to go there against Atlanta. Could obviously see extended run if that blowout happens. He's a good young athletic player, so Grant Williams is someone you should look at. Moving to the center spot, DeAndre Ayton at 8.6. I don't really see how Houston can contend with him tonight. The guy's been absolutely masterful lately, over 45 fantasy points in his last 5 of 6, over 55 in his last 2. Houston, allowing the number 2 most fantasy points to that center spot over the last 10. Get him in at 8.6. Bam Adebayo at 8.2. The Kings are not exactly sure if Rashawn Holmes will return tonight. Nonetheless, Bam's in a great spot. They traded off Dwayne Dedmon. So the Kings are likely either going to be starting Belicia or Holmes if he comes back. Nonetheless, it's a great spot for Bam here. Over 42 fantasy points in his last 3. Over 40 in his last 6 of 8. 35 or more minutes over his last 3. Obviously, Jimmy Butler could be sitting. That would be a nice little bump for Bam as well. Hassan Whiteside at 7.7. Put up 57.8 last night against San Antonio at home. Goes into Utah where he gets to face up with Rudy Gobert. I know that doesn't sound great, but he also put up 52 fantasy points against them at home a couple games ago. So, not too awful worried about that. You get one of the cheaper prices on Hassan that he's been in a while, and we know he has 50-plus upside here. He already put up 50 against them a couple games ago at home. So, Hassan at 7.7, if you want to be contrarian, is definitely there as well. Serge Ibaka at 6.3 against Indiana. Indiana is allowing the 9th most of that center spot. He just torched them for 45 fantasy points last game. 31 or more fantasy points in his last 6 straight. 29 or more minutes over his last 3 or 4. Will continue to start without Marc Gasol. So good spot for Serge at 6.3. Christian Wood at 6K for Detroit. Drummond is gone. Let's see who they're going to start. Hopefully they just give the reins over to Wood. I mean, he deserves it. He's been playing well. He's putting up a 1.26 fantasy point per minute without Drummond and Derrick Rose on the floor. So we know he's a fantasy point per minute beast. That's really good. And he's played 32 and 34 minutes over his last 2. Over 32 fantasy points in those 2 as well. So Christian Wood at 6K, I'm totally fine with. Steven Adams is a guy that I wrote down, but I'm kind of regretting it. He has not played very well, but he had 5 days off, and he come back and he plays 30 minutes. 20 fantasy points or more over his last 4. And, he's going to likely have to contend with Christian Wood, who I believe he has a nice little size differential over. So it could be a good spot for Adams here just to keep in mind. Brandon Clark, if Valanciunas happens to sit, will come into play at 4.9. And then last but not least, the cheapest I would have to go is in the only way it would have to work is if Kristaps Porzingis sits, and that's Willie Cauley-Stein at 3.3. If KP sits, you have to play Willie Cauley-Stein at 3.3. Played 26 minutes the last time that KP sat, put up 27 fantasy points. Really good spot here against Washington as well, who doesn't have Thomas Bryant. They'll likely be starting Mahinmi or Moritz Wagner. So, yeah, good spot for Willie Cauley-Stein if KP sits. If he happens to get 26 or more minutes, we definitely love that at 3.3K. All right, perfect. 29 and a half minutes. Hope you guys enjoy your Friday. Let's talk some more basketball.